Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. Welcome back to another episode of Wild Sacred Journey podcast. I am your host, Kate Powell, host and firekeeper. Medicine woman, ceremonialist, story weaver, and I started calling myself a soul revival guide. We live in what feel like really soul-starved times, and there's something about, what happens when we revive our souls that is really magical and wild, and it's part of what I like to think of as our wild sacred journey. So before we get into it, well, you're listening to this. I'm recording this a few days before the full moon, February 24th, which is my birthday. So you're listening to this on my birthday, my personal little solar return, I guess people call it. So we'll go ahead and light our candle. Opening our village fire with prayers, dreams, griefs, hopes, loves, fears, frustration, sacred rage, our boundaries, our wholeness, our intactness, our fragmentations. Honoring as we do the wide web of kin that swirls around us, that extends out from us and feeds back into us, this collective nervous system. It includes the plants, the animals, birds, bugs, rocks, trees, waters, fires, celestial bodies, our lineage, our mythical ancestors, all the other humans alive on the planet, those experiencing joy and those experiencing suffering. And so we honor all of that. Honoring that our body, whatever your body is feeling today in this moment, it is yours and it is not yours. And that is the truth. And anytime we stand at a threshold, the truth is that the threshold, whatever that growth edge for us, or that moment marking a shift for us, is both ours and not ours. And so there's this individual responsibility, this personal responsibility, and this collective responsibility, right? And I've been sitting recently with this idea of ritual versus ceremony. I think I definitely use those terms fairly interchangeably. And then recently I was getting curious, like, what is actually the difference between those? And, and some of what I was reading, people were saying, ritual is more like a daily thing or a regular thing. And it can be group or it can be individual, but it's kind of more of a regular act of devotion or connection or part of a habit or a routine or a pattern. In some ways, where a ceremony is around like a specific milestone or a larger holiday. And so they're not as frequent, I think, maybe not as common. And so I'm aware that even within sort of those definitions, there's a certain amount of mutability, I guess, maybe. And then again, there's that question of individual and collective, right? And, I spoke some in last episode about sort of that dualism, duality, and then also non-duality, right? Or non-dualism beyond, kind of that and space. And so here we are kind of in that and space again. People who work with me know we end up in that and space a lot. um yeah, and so, as I'm in the days leading up, I was feeling really uninspired today to like come on and record this episode. And, in the days leading up to my birthday every year, I actually often end up slightly grumpy and like kind of grieving. um, some people are like really into celebrating their birthdays, and that's awesome if that's you. And that just like doesn't really seem to be me. And for a while I was like, oh, maybe it's because I'm not so good at receiving and I should get better at receiving and then it'll all magically be better. And like, yeah, there's probably some truth to that. But, I also think too, we forget that our birthdays are thresholds, right? Our solar returns, that moment marking when we came forth onto this earth. And then, each solar cycle, full complete solar cycle after that marks something in us, right? It marks a passage of time. It marks a maturation. It marks, there's a lot of stuff, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual that change, hopefully, as we get older, right? And so there is this space at any threshold that we come to, whether it's a personal or a collective one, there's a space of honoring and grieving that has to happen, as well as celebrating and dreaming, right? So we have to be where we are. We have to release what's no longer serving. We have to have something new that's growing that we're tending or that we're celebrating, right? And so we're holding that and space of all of those. And so, yeah, for some reason, I seem to grieve a lot around my birthday. Um, and this year in particular, I've been kind of thinking, there's a time and a place too for rituals and ceremonies that are like ancient, right? That have the energy and the weight of tens, hundreds, thousands of years of devotion and practice behind them, right? And there's a time when that can get too heavy and too bogged down and too sort of disconnected from the original intention, right? So there's a time too, or we might have lost sight of what those are. And so then we create our own. But there is something too, I'm noticing. So where I'm kind of going with this is like, I'm noticing this year that I'm like flailing a little bit because it's like, I want to have some sort of ceremony actually for my birthday. And I'm feeling a little lost as to what that might be, and I'm finding myself curious, like, what did our ancestors, our long ago ancestors, how did they celebrate or mark an individual solar return? Did they, or is that even too individualistic, actually? I mean, I think they did. And there was probably gift giving, and there was probably, a lot of the threads that are still present in, in our celebrations now. But yeah, it makes me curious because there is something about like, I think some of it too for me is I spend a lot of my days planning, tending to details, tending to logistics, tending to people's nervous systems, tending to this, tending to that. So I noticed too, like a couple of years ago, I finally realized I was like, oh, the only thing I want for my birthday is to like not tend to things, right? Like not plan things, not tend to things. um, and so I sort of stopped having parties and celebrations and um and that was fine for a while, but then it's been interesting because then, in the last couple of years I've had people reaching out and sort of phrasing it more like, well, we would love to celebrate you, you know? And so here it is again, that individual and collective, like do we, what is our responsibility to let others celebrate us? And here's some of that receiving, right? So this is all like very raw in my brain right now. So I don't have any like deep, I'm phrasing this more as, I'm sending this out to you more as like inquiries and rambles and musings rather than like some coalescing perspective or point of view. This is a much more process oriented rather than answer oriented episode. But yeah, so those are just some musings I have going on right now between the individual and the collective and ceremony and ritual and things that have deep roots so we can fall back on them rather than having to create something new versus things that that we create new because maybe the old things aren't relevant anymore or have become too heavy or whatever. So, and then also just that point of grieving and celebrating and kind of letting both of those things be at the same time. So yeah. So I will say, if you're someone else who kind of, is interested in these types of inquiries, what I'm sort of landing in for myself is that I celebrate a couple different aspects of my birthday now. So part of my birthday, I like to spend time by myself, preferably outside moving my body. So usually a hike or something like that. And so that's kind of my time to honor my solitude, to honor my connection with the natural world without having to kind of be with anybody else. I'm someone who needs a lot of that solitude. I'm also someone who is a pretty porous person. I can be very receptive to other people's energies. So it is really important for me sometimes to really get away from other people to kind of tune into myself. And that feels like an important part of the celebration for me. And then there's also, then I find little things to do, often with smaller groups of people, because larger groups are not usually my jam. And sometimes it's just a phone chat and sometimes it's, hanging out. And whether the people know it's my birthday or not, like in some ways doesn't matter, although it kind of does too. But it's just kind of a way of just like also honoring the amazing people I have around me and the people who care about me and the people I care about. And that's a really beautiful thing to just root into at any threshold, you know? So I'm going to kind of wrap up my ramblings there. But I'm going to invite you, if you want to celebrate my birthday with me. Well, first off, you can always drop me a note. That would be welcome and lovely. I would love to hear from you. But yeah, so here's your challenge, should you choose to accept it. Do one thing today that is unplanned and playful, right? Throw the planning out. Find one, even if it's a tiny thing, one tiny thing that is unplanned that you let yourself do that sort of maybe sparks some curiosity or some joy or some exploration. Do one thing today to honor your grief and an ending of something. Again, it can be small. These don't have to be big things, right? Small things are actually usually better, but sometimes we need a big thing, a big gesture, a big movement, a big whatever. So yeah, one thing that's unplanned, one thing that honors a grief or an ending, one thing that honors where you are as you are, right? The actual ground you're standing on, the actual place you are, not where you wish you were, not where you hope to be, not where you have been, but where you are. One thing to celebrate the unknown and your dreams, the great mystery of life, right? So it's terrifying and amazing. So let's celebrate it. Let your fear come along with you if it's there. And then within those things, so the unplanned, the endings, the where you are's, the beginnings or the unknowns, the possibilities, see if you can find a way to sort of spend some time in solitude, spend some time with others, and then spend some time with nature. And maybe some of those overlap. Like nature could be with others or nature could be with your solitude. But the important thing is whether you're with yourself whether you're outside or whether you're with others, the important thing is that you pause for at least one tiny moment and just let yourself take in a sense of gratitude, love, sacredness, appreciation, right? It is a miracle that we are each of us who we are. It is a miracle that we are here in this moment. It is a miracle that we have this bountiful world around us. It is a miracle that we have each other. Like, it's crazy when you start thinking about how much more unlikely life is than likely. You know, in our day to day, we think of it as so boring, so mundane, so inevitable, right? And yet, like on a cellular level, you know, life is less likely than it is likely. Life on this planet being inhabitable by, you know, all of the creatures and plants that are here is less likely than it is likely. Right. So, yeah. So, in honor of my birthday, let's like just take a moment to like take that in and take that in ways that honor your own miraculousness and appreciate. So, appreciate rather than just like internalize it. Right. So feel it in a way that fills you up and lets it spill out. Right. So that it moves to others as well. So, your time in solitude, your time with others, your time with nature, and then play and grieve and be present and dream and be freaked out by it. And yeah, and that way you'll probably be doing a lot of what I'm doing. All right, friends. Well, I will leave you here on what feels like a kind of tumultuous, kind of frictiony full moon that we're building towards, with just a lot of heaviness and grief in the world, but also beginnings of spring in the Northern Hemisphere, the joy of longer days, of stronger, warmer sun, of budding plants. Yeah. And just there it all is. So thank you, yeah, for being here. If you feel like dropping me a note, please do. If you take on any or all of those challenges, and you feel like sharing about that with me, I'd love to hear it. You can usually in some spaces you can comment on the post. You can also yeah, you can drop me an email, kate@wildsacredjourney.com, or find me on social media. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it. So with that in mind, we offer gratitude for our village fire. Maybe that sense of gratitude or appreciation is filling you right now and spilling out in some small way into the space around you. And until next time. Hi, Kate here again. Thank you for gathering with us. Whether you've been here a while or found your way here thanks to today's guest, it means so much to me and the world I dream of to have you here. I hope you'll tune in for more of our conversations. We humans seem to be at a profound threshold and facing questions of deep impact for the future and the world. We need our full hearts and humanity as we sow seeds of change in these times of joy and heartbreak. I count myself lucky to be here now, around this virtual village fire, weaving our stories into a medicine with humans like you. As a community medicine space, this podcast is relational. It weaves webs of connection and mutual respect and care across time and space. If you appreciate and support the future we're seeding here, you can support the weaving of this web in a few ways. 1, share episodes with friends and family or online with your community. It also helps the podcast immensely if you like, rate, subscribe to, or follow the podcast where you watch or listen, so you get notified when new episodes drop and new listeners find us as they search. 2, join us on Patreon. Doing so supports conversations like the one you just heard and allows you access to live community gatherings and medicine circles and more as we continue to grow. It also helps me keep the space advertisement free so the conversations stay intact as they are. If you have questions, suggestions, connections, or would like to find out more about working with me, you can find me online at www.wildsacredjourney.com, on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or email me, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. Until next time, from my heart to yours, I release today's fire with a prayer for our individual and collective wholeness, connection, and joy. May it be so.